Hitep family, I am your host, Shay Shetta, and welcome to the Black History Channel. I am so excited to bring to you today a very special guest, Dr. Runoko Rashidi. Dr. Rashidi has worked with some of the greatest scholars of our time, including Ivan Van Sertima, Asa Hilliard, John Henrik Clark, John G. Jackson, and Yusuf Ben Buchanan. Runoko Rashidi is a historian, anthropologist, researcher, and lecturer and world traveler. Today he has written or edited 18 books and is working on several others. Today Runoko has visited 120 countries, including 32 countries in Africa, and lectured in 65. As an author, Runoko's latest books are his first children's book, Asada Garvey and Me, A Global Journey for Children, and My Global Journeys in Search of the African Presence. Runoko Rashidi is based in Los Angeles and Paris. He is one of our most treasured scholars. Greetings, Runoko.
Oh, greetings. It's nice to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on the Black
A
History
pleasure.
Channel. So tell us a little bit more about your current researches.
Well, the big thing right now, I'm doing research on African artifacts in museums around the world. You know, I made a commitment, sounded crazy at the time, I think I got carried away, that I was going to visit every museum in the world with African artifacts or significant African artifacts and photograph them. That seems very ambitious. It would have been more realistic to say I'm going to visit a lot of museums or the majority, but I said everyone. And most of them I've already been to. So I've completed about 90% of that project, and it's very exciting to me.
So what are some of the most interesting things that you've seen on your
Oh,
journey?
so much. Every museum, you look for certain things. You look for a section on the Nile Valley. That's always exciting. You look for me anyway, African artifacts from the Greco-Roman world, places you don't expect African people to be. You look for collections from Southeast Asia, from Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand, that are really remarkable. For other parts of Africa, you look for images of the African presence in the European Renaissance. I'm convinced that there are enough artifacts in these museums around the world to reconstruct the entire history of African people and do it accurately. So that's what I'm doing.
So why are you doing this? What inspired you to do this?
Well, just a desire to know. You know, I think that I say all the time, everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. And that's something I'm good at. I'm drawn to it. I'm willing to invest time and money into it like few other people in history. And I think it's important. It's something I enjoy. I crave constant intellectual stimulation, and I'm of the belief that black people need to do some things for themselves and by themselves. And one of the most important parts of that is writing our history from our perspective, without apologizing, without stuttering, without stammering, without any of that. And so these museums are there with these magnificent collections of African art, of loot, just waiting for us to document it, and I enjoy it.
Wow. So after you do this research, do you plan to include it in a book for us to read about?
In the intro, you mentioned I've written or edited, I think, 18 books, maybe more than that. And I'm always doing some more. Now, right now, my big book project, I have about 5, but the biggest one is a visual collection, or a collection of the most important photographs that come from this museum hunt. But beyond that, I've taken tens of thousands of photographs. Some of them are excellent. And in many cases, artifacts that I've never seen in books before. So it's very important for me to organize them in such a manner that other people can utilize. I'm getting older now, and I feel it. You know, I'm getting old, Runoko Rashidi. So what are you going to do with your stuff? And who will benefit from it? I think that when a scholar passes, and hopefully this, in my case, won't be for a long, long, long time, and their works, their archives, is scattered to the far corners of the earth, that's a sin. That should be a crime against humanity. So it's also very important for me to take all these photographs that I've collected and organize them in such a manner that future generations will benefit from them as well. And I think about that every day, and I work on it every day.
So you mentioned the importance of us writing our own history.
Yeah.
What can that do to change the state of Black people today?
Everything. I think that we need to put more priority on our history. You see inklings of it in little ways. Like, for example, I see lots of television commercials about ancestry. You know, there is AfricanAncestry.com as well. And you see some Black people trying to find out a little bit about where they came from. It's very important. But I think that we need to go much, much more deeper than that. History is not just dates and facts and figures, it's life. It's the story of a people. And we need to know our story. What a young sister says in Washington, D.C., something I like. She modified something that I was credited with saying. Her name is Atlantis Browder, and she likes to say, and I love it, the more you love your history, the more you love yourself. And we need a lot of love right now. We need a big dose of self-love, and history can provide that. It's been suggested that history is our immune system, and that in the deepest, darkest days of despair, you can go back in your history and take refuge and sanctuary. The danger of that is that that's where you remain, that you go back into the past and you stay in the past, whereas you have all kinds of problems confronting you right now. And so we must be thinkers and doers. We must use the past as an inspiration and a guideline for the future. But you cannot at the same time live in the past. You have to confront the realities of race, white supremacy, capitalism, gender exploitation right now. You know, I'm a race man. I love Black people. But I also realize that there's economic exploitation. And there's the exploitation and discrimination against women. There's the abuse of the environment. So we have to be able to tackle all of those things. And in some way or another, I think my work touches on all of that.
So how does your research relate to all of the current events that are happening today, the things that Black people are facing today in regards to discrimination in many different areas in our lives?
Touches on it in every way. For example, if you know you've done great things in the past and you have greatness in you, then that means you don't have to accept the status quo. That our history doesn't start with slavery, that we have a history that goes beyond that. If you know you've done great things, you can aspire to do great things. You don't have to accept the order of things as they are. So it gives you a kind of a parameter. It gives you a kind of a look into your potential. I think that's the most important thing. And again, as I say, it's also a sanctuary. It's a tough world we face today. So the ability just to withdraw and say, I know I did something great, I think gives you the stamina to prepare yourself for the long haul in terms of the struggle. Now, I've been doing this for a long time, since I was a university freshman, over like 44 years ago. And you learn some things in that process. You learn that no matter how hard you try, you can't do it by yourself. And you learn no matter how hard you try, you're not going to change the situation overnight. So history allows you to look at the longevity, the fact that we're the original people in the world, that we've survived the transatlantic slave trade, we've survived the invasion of Africa, the colonization of Africa, and therefore we are in this for the long haul, and we have to prepare as such. So I guess what I'm saying is that history is indispensable. And I get that all the time. People ask all the time, Runoko, Rashidi, I got all kinds of problems. Why are you talking about this Black stuff? Why are you talking about what happened yesterday? And my response is, if you don't know what happened yesterday, how do you plan for today and tomorrow? That what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. And what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. So we want to program into our people that we come from greatness, that we are an ancient people, and that the future belongs to us and we prepare for it. I know that's a long answer, but I think that addresses some of the things you raised.
what's interesting to me is that you're going to all these museums and there's these artifacts of African people.
Yeah.
Who is studying this?
No, very few people. I think that what we have to do is to make history and historical research exciting. Now they would say sexy, to make it a priority. I think a lot of young black men can tell you how many points LeBron James scored, what Kobe Bryant is doing in retirement, et cetera, the NFL draft, but cannot tell you the name of a single African who lived before slavery. So what we have to do is change our priorities. We are the first people in history, and somehow we have to generate an interest in our community. Now, one thing virtually every black person I've ever met agrees on is black people need to unite. I mean, we hear that all, that we need to unite, we need to get together. What could be the basis of us getting together? History. Tell me I'm wrong. No, don't tell me I'm wrong. But don't all people want to feel proud of themselves? I don't care who you are. I don't care if you are the preacher in the pulpit, if you're a physician, anybody. I'm just the whole spectrum of black society, African American society. Don't we all want to be proud? Don't we all want to feel like we come from a people who gave something to the world? And so history can be a very unifying force. History can be a weapon for liberation, and that's how I see it.
Yeah, and most of the history that we see about ourselves is that we didn't contribute.
Yeah. Now you have programs on TV like Underground, which I understand is a good program. I guess it's about the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
Yeah, you look like you're not a TV person.
It.
Yeah, but a few programs like that, pretty good programs. Okay. And we know about movies like 12 Years a Slave and Django, and you have movies like The Help and what have you, and The Butler, et cetera, et cetera. So we know we've had a tough road to hoe. But we don't want to minimize the suffering of our ancestors. But even when we talk about enslavement, I guess this is the point I'm trying to make, let's talk about resistance to enslavement. I mean, the suffering, we never forget, but we did more than suffer. Some Africans actually fought back. And this fighting back took different forms. Sometimes it took the form of just trying to keep the family together. Other times it took the form of outright rebellion. So even if we're going to talk about enslavement, let's talk about it from a perspective that can be inspirational, not just depressing. So that you say to yourself, I don't even want to hear anymore, but you find something to inspire you from it. And that's our job.
So how do you think we can unite black people more on a local level?
Well, I'm just a simple historian, and I wish that I had, all the answers. But I think that what you're doing with this television program and things of this nature are very, very important. This morning, just before I came here to the studio, somebody sent me a video they had done, a DVD. It's on YouTube, and it's about our perception of Africa, and it's just wonderful. It's really, really positive. So I think we have to magnify and amplify our efforts and not get discouraged because at this precise moment we're not generating the buzz that we would like to. But I don't think it's that we're doing the wrong thing. I just think we have to do more of the right thing, more of what we're doing right now.
In regards to our relationships as black people, what do you think that we can, and I know you're just a historian, but just from your observations from traveling around the world, what are some things that you think that will improve our relationships with one another?
I don't think African liberation is complicated. I think it's the application that's hard. But to me, we need to do the most basic things. Spend money with each other. Project an image of a God that looks like you. Join an organization of like-minded people. Change our spending habits. But one thing is very basic. Black men need to be with black women and love and honor and respect them. I think that's absolutely key. And again, some of that comes from history too. I mean, if you love yourself, you're going to love a person that looks like you and reflects you. But it just seems to me that if black men and black women can't come together, then we really are lost. And I don't believe we're lost. So that to me is the basic building block. We need to do the basics. And I think black men being with black women is just absolutely essential. And besides, black women are so beautiful and so desirable. What black man who isn't crazy wouldn't want to be with one? And if your mother is a black woman, wouldn't you want to honor her? And I think about all those sisters that suffered in those dungeons in West Africa and all the things they were subjected to in slavery days when we could not protect them. And so the idea now of me being with a black woman is a form of redemption, and it's very important. It's like a sacred duty. Mm-hmm. So that's very, very big to me.
Mm-hmm. It all starts with the family.
It all starts with it.
Mm-hmm.
But even before, I guess it starts with, how do you separate the family, the community, yourself? Mm-hmm. Aren't they all interlinked?
Right.
And maybe that's a part of our problem, is that we've attempted to separate those things. In other words, say, later for the community that birthed me, later for the family that produced me. I'm just interested in what I want to do, what's good for me, what gives me pleasure. And there's a real disconnect there. Mm-hmm. So again, if we're tying it to history, we want to make people proud of themselves, want to make people feel good about themselves, want to make people feel like there's hope. We want to make a black man be aware that black women are queens, and sisters aware that black men are kings, and that children are treasures. And again, you can't separate history from that.
Mm-hmm. So you've traveled to 120 countries.
A few overseas colonies and territories, but yeah.
Okay, so and I've also seen that you also document the black people,
of course,
around the world. Is there any commonality between all of us, or the African diaspora?
Yeah, I would say so. First, I need to change that bio, so that instead of saying I've been to 120 countries, I'd be able to say I've been to 120 countries in search of the African presence, because it does make a difference. There is a distinct African or black personality. Now, you notice I use the word black now, not just African. I'm still a little confused. One thing is you learn as you go, and it's very humbling, is that there's so much knowledge to possess that what you have is just really like a few grains of sand on the beach. Learning is an elixir. I'm stimulated by desire for knowledge. So there is an African worldview that's optimistic. Give you an example, maybe try to narrow it down. There's an African in the Roman world, a man named Terence Afar. Terence was a great writer, lived long in the BC period in early Rome. And he's credited with having two expressions. One is, where there is life, there's hope. A black man said that. And this sounds quintessentially African. And no matter how difficult the moment, the sun is going to shine tomorrow. If we could just get through this, it's going to be okay one day. And the other thing he said is, I am a man, and therefore nothing human is alien to me. A kind of a willingness to embrace and not just push aside. A tendency on the part of black people to forgive, even before forgiveness is asked. You can't help but think of this guy, Dylan Roof, this fascist in South Carolina, that murdered those 9 black people in church, some of them on their knees. And before, in some cases, their family members were even buried, they're saying, I forgive you, to a guy who hasn't even asked for forgiveness, a diehard racist. So no matter where I go, there's something about black people that's still full of love and hope, and that we shall and can overcome. And that no matter what you've done to me, I'm prepared to forgive you. Now, a lot of times I wish we'd apply that more to ourselves. I can be mad at you because you stole my girlfriend in high school 50 years ago, and I still got a grudge. But forgive a racist who shot my father down in the church. So there's a kind of a contradiction, but in general, I would just say that black people in general have a kind of an open, loving sense of family. And no matter where we go in the world, I find that.
That's very interesting.
Well, we're very interesting.
Yes, we are very interesting. But my question would be, would you would you say that that has been detrimental to us in some points in history, that willingness to forgive?
I'd say on the one hand, it's beautiful. You know, when Barack Obama, who I loved and admired and still do, went to that church and he broke out and started singing Amazing Grace, even though I know the history of that song, I started singing too. I had tears in my eyes. So on the one hand, it's beautiful. You know, it's like cosmic. But on the other hand, as you say, it leads to our detriment time after time after time. So that a black man, it's not uncommon for a brother who is racially profiled from cradle to grave, you know, who can be shot in broad daylight with his hands in the air begging, don't shoot, who is the last one to get the job, who is the first one to get fired, traditionally even the first one to get killed in the movie. When it comes to picking a mate, will say, I don't see color. Well, I saw that blonde. Maybe that's the color I saw. But you know what I mean. A person who will say, I don't recognize color. And we're all the same. And we're all just one race. Or a person who will say, a black person, I don't see any need to spend money with other black people. I just want the best. Or a person will say, I don't see the need to live in the black community. I just want to live in a place that's nice for me. So this sense of just loving a world that doesn't love us back. And I think it's deep down inside all of us, at least it is in me. Now, I'm a hardened historian. I've seen a lot of the world. But I'm still hurt when there's an injustice done in our community. When there's a Sandra Bland or a Trayvon or so many, it still hurts. You still say to yourself, how could anybody be that cruel? How could you treat a young woman like that? How can you shoot a young black man who hasn't done anything but be black? And the jury will not even indict, a grand jury will not even indict them. It hurts. And I think so, on the one hand, there's a sense of humanity in black people that I absolutely love, that's admirable. But at the same time, you say, boy, how can we keep believing that the leopard is going to change their spots? And that's one of life's big contradictions, and it's a contradiction, I think, in the African worldview.
Yeah, and I feel like it could be hurting us in a lot.
It does hurt us
in a lot of situations.
But it's like that with just about anything. You know, you have positives and negatives. Now, here's a deeper question: how do you change that?
Yes.
How do you change a people's cultural personality? How do you, on the one hand, get this person's foot off your neck? Nobody wants anybody's foot on their neck without becoming that person. In other words, I don't want to be a black white man. I don't want to be dominated by white supremacy. But at the same time, I don't want to be the person that's oppressing me, if that makes sense. I don't want to take on the attributes of those who have done so many terrible things to us. And for the most part, I think that's how black people feel. You know, black people don't, in spite of everything that Europeans have done to us, for the most part, I don't think there's a deep sense of hatred or vengeance. We want to engage in revenge. We just want to be free. We just want to have a good life. We want to live and let live. But it's difficult to do that when you interact with a group of people who want to dominate, who want to control. And just like Africans have a worldview based, in my opinion, on love and giving and offering and being inclusive, I think Europeans have just the opposite of worldview. And that comes from living in that ice for such a long time. There's only one race, and that's the human race, which originated in Africa. But those Africans went all over the world. And they adapted physically so that you have the human races, or what I call different ethnic groups. But in my opinion, that's relatively minor. What's major was the psychological adaptation, so that if you're living in a world full of ice, you become a cold person. And we're dealing with that today, and we still haven't figured out how to deal with it.
It's almost like you would have to fight that person with their same...
Yeah, but you don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
So I suppose there's a kind of a balance there. You don't want to lose who you are, but you don't want to be oppressed either.
Right. So you can kind of play the game.
Yeah.
Until you get to where you need to get.
Yeah, and that leads to kind of a schizophrenia too.
Right.
You know, there's a man named Frantz Fanon, the great psychiatrist, and he wrote a book called Black Skin, White Mask. And he talked about how what the oppressed tends to do is want to take on the attributes of the oppressor.
Wow.
Well, we could go on and on. I don't want to bore you with that comment, but I think that as we're talking about really deep stuff.
Yeah. So, in regards to your traveling, what would be the major issue facing Africa today?
Lack of organization, lack of consciousness. But I'd say more than anything, we're disorganized as a people. What we are good at is getting mad. You know, we can be distraught, but in terms of actually being organized to confront the realities that I face, we're not organized. Kwame Ture, who was a brother that had a big influence on me, who wasn't a scholar per se, but a man who had a profound influence on me, used to say, organize, organize, organize. So I think without organization, we're never really going to achieve the power that we deserve to have in the world. And so that's the thing that's perhaps the most disturbing wherever I am. There's the poverty, there's the disease, et cetera. But the key to all of that is consciousness and organization. And if we were to get organized, we could change the world tomorrow.
What's the extent of the poverty in Africa?
It's deep. It's heartbreaking in some cases. I mean, literally heartbreaking. There's a little film clip going on right now about these young kids in Central Africa who are digging for coltan. Coltan is a product that's in all our cell phones. Everybody, no matter where I go, everybody has a cell phone. Everybody's texting, somebody's doing something, somebody's doing the other, but everybody's got a phone now. But there's a mineral that's utilized in those cell phones, and the best and most of it comes out of Central Africa. And the Africans dig it up in horrendous working conditions, in some cases children 4 and 5 years old. It's heartbreaking. Africa is the wealthiest continent in the world in terms of natural resources, and yet it has the poorest people. This brother who I liked so much, Peter Tosh, reggae artist from Jamaica, an ancestor now, used to say Africa is the richest place with the poorest race. Oh my, what a disgrace. And I feel that way. And sometimes it's really, really heartbreaking when you are forced to look at it like that. Africa is the birthplace of humanity. Africa is the birthplace of civilization. And then you see people who have virtually nothing. It really hurts. I mean, Flint, Michigan hurts. And the world just seems to be indifferent. So, yeah, that stands out, and it can be heartbreaking.
And poverty is prevalent in every African community you've seen throughout the world.
Well, I would say if we were to look at the continent of Africa, for example, I would say most of the 54 countries in Africa would rank as among the poorest in the world. But you could also go to Brazil, you could go to Colombia, you could go to parts of Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia. Essentially, wherever black people are, they tend to be at the bottom of the social ladder. Or in terms of poverty, they tend to rank very, very high. And then another thing that has been very important for me, kind of ties into what you're talking about, but I think it's an important point to make, is that the black world is not just confined to the Americas and Africa. One of the things that my work is, or I've tried to do, is expose the fact that you have hundreds of millions of black people in Asia, in India. You have a huge black and impoverished community in Australia, in the Pacific Islands. For example, West Papua, which is the western half of the island of New Guinea, is under very brutal occupation by the Indonesians. So I thought maybe that's something that you didn't ask, but something that I think is very important, that we want to broaden our definition of the black world, and we truly are a global people.
Yes, yes. But the conditions are still the same.
Still the same. You know, I defy anybody to tell me a country in the world where black people are in positions of power and authority. Marcus Garvey, more than 100 years ago, and I'm a Garveyite, he was asked, Mr. Garvey, how did you get motivated? I mean, how did you start the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League? And Garvey says something to the effect, I looked around for the black man's army, his navy, his men of big affairs, and could not find them. And so I decided to help create them. In many ways, that same question could be asked today. If I were to ask you, for example, who speaks for Africa? What black man or woman in the world can we identify that speaks for Africa? We'd be hard-pressed to find anybody. So black people in Melanesia, in bad shape. Black people in South America are suffering. Black people in Mexico, black people throughout the Caribbean, in Africa itself, as well as the United States. And I think I've come to the conclusion that as messed up as it is here, African Americans probably have more resources than any group of African people in the world. And these resources take different forms. On the one hand, financial resources. Virtually all of us have a laptop or a computer or something, or we have access to one. We've all got a cell phone. Very few of us are really hungry. We may not have the diet we want to have, but not many of us are starving. We have the ability to come together and think and talk and plot and plan. So I just think these are resources that we're not effectively taking advantage of.
We could be the initiators.
We could be.
Yeah.
And isn't that ironic
Yeah.
for the descendants of people who were taken out of the door of no return to be in a position to play such a pivotal role in the future of the whole, entire black world? That's
Yes.
deep.
Yes, that's very deep. Well, it seems like we can start with history in order to improve
Malcolm
our
X
status.
said, of all our studies, it is history that is most qualified to reward our research. Now, we need everything. We need an economic base. We need to work on our health. Some people would think or say that we need a strong spiritual component. I would not disagree with that. We need to change the educational system, but we need our history. We need knowledge of self. It's absolutely fundamental. You can't separate that from the broader struggle of African people. We're talking about a whole struggle, but the history has to play an important role in that struggle on some level or another.
Well, that's great. Well, we'll leave right there on that note.
Well,
and
sister, it's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on the Black History Channel, and we hope that you can come back. And
We hope. You need wild horses to keep me out of here. It's a pleasure.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Rashidi. And thank you for joining us here at the Black History Channel, where our history is your history. Dwa Mary. That was awesome.
It was okay. But I don't think you should use it.
Why?
No, I think